It's my pleasure to introduce James Sheehan. He is the Charity Bureau Chief at the Office of the New York State Attorney General. And I think beyond that, you need no introduction. So, please.
Thank you very much. And it's always fun to follow David because he has so much energy in any presentation he does, even welcome to our country kind of things. I want to talk today about the charity effectiveness and some of the issues that we are seeing in the Charities Bureau. But before I do that, I have my colleague, the Deputy Bureau Chief, Karen Kunstler-Goldman, if you would stand up, Karen, who has now served for 35 years in the Charities Bureau. And she sometimes feels lonely, so if you would come by and just give her your business cards and join our influentials list. We have an email list that we send around information about charities issues to anybody who wants to get the information. We have about 2,500 influentials in New York at this point. And it's a way for us to communicate and to hear back from people on what matters to them. Our Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, and there's something happening this year. I think it's called an election. But Eric is unusual as an Attorney General in that his background before he became Attorney General and State Senator was representing nonprofits and, in fact, working for a number of them, including reproductive rights and prisoners. So he's very much attuned to this area and very concerned that we not just regulate, but that we support. You've heard the thank yous, and I'll do mine too. I always enjoy coming to this program. And thanks to Claire, and thanks to Luana, and thanks to Gabriella for putting it together. It's always extremely well organized and efficient. It amazes me you can get this many people up to the 14th floor of the building on time, and Luana is a tiger for on time, so I want to make sure I comply with her requirements. If you're a certain age, you may recognize this picture of the little engine that could, and if you look at nonprofits in this state, they are the 1/6 of the workforce, a little over 1/6 of the workforce, and as you'll see, they're an economic and social engine for New York. There are 103,000 nonprofit organizations. We did a presentation last week, and in preparation for it, Karen told me there are 10,000 nonprofit organizations in Brooklyn. I said that can't be right. That you can't have 10,000 in one borough, and she went back and did the data again. It's 11,000. So this is an engine both for social change, artistic betterment, and for the economy in our state. And we are ahead of everybody else in the country on this. I know that everybody's excited in other states about landing the 50,000 jobs from Amazon. And that's it's about 1/20th of what we have in the charity sector in New York State. You will not see states bidding for nonprofits to come into their jurisdiction. They sort of assume they'll be there and do what they do, and that's where we are. I want to talk to you about 3 major disruptive challenges for nonprofits in New York. And again, Luana told me I have 20 minutes plus questions, so this is going to be quick. The first thing I want to talk about is what I'll call the new fugitive slave law. The second is the continuing problem of charities embezzlements and how they're responded to. And the third is compliance with limits on political activity. And each of these has the potential to be a significant risk for organizations, and I want to cover them in sequence. So why do I talk about the fugitive slave law? In 1850, there was a major political change in the country, and a decision in the Missouri Compromise that in order to keep the South in the Union, that the punishments and the rights of slaveholders would be protected, punishments for escaped slaves, and the protections for slave owners were necessary in order to make the country stick together. And so what happened was that the fugitive slaves had very few rights before that, but a variety of other people had their rights taken away too. The U.S. attorneys in each district were required to go after fugitive slaves, fugitive enslaved people, and you could be dragged in to be a part of a posse to chase after and to recover escaped enslaved people. One of the things that New York should be proudest of in that time period was the response of charities and nonprofits to that particular situation. And there were multiple layers to it. And I'm going to suggest to you, my analogy is to some of the immigration things that we're going to see over the next 3 years. All right? So at one level, you had sort of the well-off and committed nonprofit. And that was the Plymouth Church of the Pilgrim, located in Brooklyn Heights, which Henry Ward Beecher was probably the most famous orator in the entire country at the time. He was the pastor of the church. He could advocate against slavery and do things that were frankly illegal, but nobody was going to arrest him because he was too powerful, too connected, and too able to say, call on his friends. But if you go to that church today, in the basement was a major station for the Underground Railroad. And it was a significant issue because in Manhattan, they're making money. The Wall Streeters, I don't know if they're called Wall Streeters then, were making money from the cotton trade. And they had absolutely no interest in upsetting the South and losing that valuable business. So people would come over in boats to Brooklyn Heights because if they stayed in Manhattan, they would be caught. And that became the Grand Central Depot of the Underground Railroad for New York. But once you get into the depot, you got to go somewhere. All right? And so the people who had much less power, and they were the free African American communities in Brooklyn and upstate, had to take these people in and find ways to move them out. So they would go from Brooklyn Heights, they go into Weeksville, which was the second largest African American free community in the country at the time. And the thing is, if you look at what happened in response to the fugitive slave law in New York, it was wealthy and well-connected, advocating for taking responsibility for one part of this, the free communities of color who took responsibility for another, and charities throughout the state who helped support and protect fugitive enslaved people as they made their way to Canada. All right, and so when I look at today, in 2018, there's a story in the Syracuse paper today about the increased arrests of people who've been in this country for 5, 10, 15 years. And they are not criminals, right? Despite what you may have heard from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, about 40% of the people who are being arrested today are known to the Immigration Service. They've been here a long time. They have families. They have jobs. And the impact of the more sustained Immigration Service, imagine that you get up one day, and this is the story in the Syracuse paper, you drop your spouse off at work, you drop your kids off at school, you head to your job, and you're stopped by the Immigration Service and arrested, all right? So the effect on you is obvious, the effect on your family is huge, and the effect on other people in your community who know that might happen to them forces them deeper into the shadows of their community. So if we look to what charities do in these circumstances, some charities do advocacy, right? They advocate on behalf of immigrants. Some do legal representation. Some do food supplies for the families who lose their major breadwinner. Some charities do religious activities and support. Some charities advocate against the government and the Immigration Service. Some charities advocate on behalf of sanctuary cities and protecting the people from what is essentially an arbitrary process. And if you look at the civil rights of fugitive slaves in 1850, right, they no jury trials. Anyone who protected them was accused of harboring a fugitive, and it was a crime in itself. But today, if we look at who's at risk, all right, there are nearly 1 million people in New York State who are undocumented and are at risk for deportation, depending on how much the federal government ramps up this effort. All right, 1.2 million New Yorkers have at least one undocumented family member, and most of them have been here more than 5 years, so they're around us every day. The thing, like the fugitive slaves, they have no right to liberty, no right to work, no right to a jury trial on deportation, or in the fugitive slaves case, of being sent back south, and no right to an arrest warrant before seizure. And the other thing is the statute, just as in 1850, the statute provides for felony punishment for anyone who harbors an illegal. All right, that's in the federal law. So let's talk about the challenges to the charities that assist the undocumented. They'll face funding cuts and funding conditions on sanctuary cities and charities. The grant provisions that basically make sure that you understand and agree you cannot use any federal funds directly or indirectly in support of the enactment, repeal, modification, or adoption of any law, regulation, or policy. So in theory, under this statute, if you advocate for a change in ICE's policy toward undocumented persons, you may have violated a grant condition. ICE's new policy on detainers and warrants, which is much tougher, and I talked about the harboring statute, and this is if you think about this, as an officer of the Attorney General's office, should I be advocating for conduct opposing unfair laws? This was a problem they faced in the 1850s, too. And I was an assistant U.S. attorney at one point with responsibility for immigration cases. And the cases, this is 30-some years ago, and the cases would come in, and the Immigration Service would hold them for a day because they're a duty assistant for the day, and I was the wrong duty assistant, because you'd watch what happened to families. Right? Somebody had been here for 10 years. Maybe they overstayed their tourist visa 10 years before, but the harm to the family and the disruption and the effect on the community was so great, it was painful. So the concept here is, what do we do? What do we do to deal with the new fugitive slave law? If your organization serves immigrants in these situations, you want to look at the policies and information you provide to protect them and protect your organization. And there's a great guide from the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, which you can get on the web to take a look at. The city has done some great stuff, too, on this front. And the Attorney General and other Attorneys General put out a book called Setting the Record Straight on Local Involvement in Federal Civil Immigration Enforcement, which I'd recommend to you. So that's, the opportunity, to me, is for charities to make a difference in what has the potential to be one of the major disruptive activities in the last 50 years in this country. It will not be easy, and the federal government will find ways to make it difficult and miserable for people who do it. But I think this is an opportunity for conscience, for demonstrating what New York is about, and for living up to what this city did now almost 150 years ago. Thank you. So the next thing I want to talk about is the continuing problem of embezzlement. So we go from a moral issue to bad things happen to good people. All right? And this is my news. Every organization gets embezzled from. Federal government, state government, local governments, major corporations, professional practices, accountants' offices, charities. They all get embezzled from. And the difficulty is, what do you do in response? And the Boston Globe did a piece last month in which they did a study from the IRS 990s of all the organizations in the country which had embezzlements that exceeded $250,000 or 5% of revenues, and they listed them out, so you can go to their website and you can pick them up. And Karen and I talked about whether we should put out the list for New York. The difficulty is the people who report are usually the good guys. The problem ones are the ones who don't report. And so, but the issue is, what do you do in response? So a very good story about thinking about these issues and how to present them. So a little bit of embezzlement news. This is, I try to stay up, the thing about this speech is every week you have more material. But charitable trusts, right? Stole more than $3.5 million. First directing donations to the trust of legitimate Jewish charitable organizations and redirecting the funds to his phony charity accounts. He ended up with a house in Southampton, 6,000 square foot house worth about $3 million, on which he paid no real estate taxes, but he also, the entire value of the house was money he had stolen from these charities. We also, this year, announced a case involving the New York, NILAG, the New York Legal Assistance Guild, in which their chief executive, over the course of 10 years, embezzled about $1 million from the organization. All right, and when he was discovered, he paid most of it back. Okay, what does that tell you about both the numbers and the success of the scheme? That the concern I have, though, is not so much the chief executive. It is the fact the auditors, right? The auditors did their job. At least the second group of auditors. And they did, right, the management, before this was discovered, they did a management letter to the organization saying you have no internal controls. No one is managing your money. No one is keeping track of this stuff. Unfortunately, the head of the audit committee was not present at the meeting where that letter was presented, and nothing was done to address this. And of course, that lack of controls was what let this gentleman do what he did. So the issue, they've turned around and dealt with the issue since then, but this is a temptation to trust your people, which we all do, but you have to be skeptical. So this is another one. This is a guilty plea in, again, it's last month. He was the CEO of the Harlem Congregation for Community Improvement, stole over $390,000 by charging personal unauthorized expenses to a corporate credit card. This issue, I cannot tell you how many of these cases we see. Social service agencies, religious organizations, arts organizations. You know, if you have a checkbook, people, they write entries. There's something there. Credit cards, you walk in, you use it, and then the question is, anybody look after the fact? And since there's no prior authorization, it's not just about the organization. When people use their credit card, they have two credit cards in their wallet. One is business, one is personal. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes they use the wrong one. And the issue is, what happens next? Does anybody pay attention? Does anyone reconcile it? Most boring activity in the world is reconciling credit card receipts, right? And plus, it drives people crazy. My wallet is about an inch thicker than it should be because I have receipts that I haven't yet handed in that I need to get done before the end of the fiscal year. But it needs someone to watch over that. And again, what did he pay for? Auto repairs, medical bills, electronics, clothing, and gifts. And this repeats itself so often in the social services and arts area, it's really critical that organizations have policies to deal with it. Okay. This gentleman he's from Buffalo, and he was in charge of an organization that took there was a faculty student association, all right? And what they do is they run the bookstores, the food service, and student club accounts. And so what he stole $330,000. He did it slowly, right? So people didn't notice as much. So he appointed three faculty members who seldom showed up and 6 student members who never showed up, all right? So he basically ran the show himself. And again, sometimes when you have an organization, multiple accounts and multiple systems, it's hard to pay attention to all of it. Okay. So what troubles me as a prosecutor, as a former prosecutor, is that he stole $330,000, and what was his sentence? Probation and community service, all right? And this happens a lot. There is a belief in some circles that white-collar criminals should not go to jail, and there's also a belief that as long as you pay it back when you're caught, and it's from a nonprofit, it shouldn't be the basis for any kind of prison sentence. And I respectfully disagree with that policy. So one of the things you need to know is that with the IRS 990 data finally publicly available, what you're seeing is that it's much more accessible to us. We have data analytics tools that allow us to see it. And that's not just us. That will be other people in the field and charities evaluators and so forth. And the difficulty is people still have what are very common reactions, right? We can't tell our members. We can't tell the public. Let's just hope no one notices. He's a good guy who made some mistakes. And give the embezzler a chance to resign quietly. And we need you to think about what a board should do, right? And what management should do. Investigation, notice to the board, a communication strategy, what happened. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it that makes the difference. Insurance coverage, recovery of the perpetrator. Okay, I can see the hook about to, okay. We will write you. We have an embezzler project. So we will write your organization and say, bad things happen to good people. Please tell us what you have done to prevent this kind of event going forward. Please tell us how you addressed it, what you're going to do to address it going forward. Please don't throw those letters away, because we've been here since 1789. I think we'll be here next year too, and we will follow up on them. And again, it's not to say you're a bad person. It's to say what are you doing to safeguard the assets of and the reputation of your charity. The final thing is the IRS and political activity. And when we talked earlier about the issue with the new fugitive slave law, I think we're going to see more challenges to charities that are more energetic in protecting the rights of people who need those rights protected. So what I have here in my PowerPoint is just a summary of the law governing what you can do and what you can't do. It is said you can't get involved in politics, all right? But you can get involved in advocacy, all right? You can't participate in a political campaign for a candidate for elective office. You can't make contributions. We have a project where we look for contributions to elected officials, and those are not allowed. What is allowed, though? You can lobby on legislation, right? You can approach actions by. So if you go to the court, you go to administrative body, you go to the executive branch, you can take positions on what they do. All right? So that issue of what's allowed and what's not, especially if you become more involved in more aggressive activity, you need to think about what your rules are and make sure people understand them. Can actively support political candidates, you can support causes. We have in our website a variety of things about how to run organizations that we've gathered and put together over the last 20 years and revised with a new statute. Right from the start for directors, internal controls to prevent that Dennis Black from happening in your organization, whistleblower policies, accounting, and our influential email list. So I'll pitch that one more time. Karen is our email list keeper and would love to collect your cards so she has more. The other thing we have are our searchable public registry, how-to guides, and advice and assistance. And with that, I think we have time for some questions, Luana.
I don't have a question from the audience yet, but I do have one for you. On the subject of embezzlements, what are the risk factors for embezzlement? How would people recognize if there were risk factors in their organizations and plan to minimize that? Okay,
so we talk about risk factors. The only professional that any charity in New York is required to hire by law is an independent auditor. And when I used to be a lawyer, I still am, but when I used to be a lawyer and I supervised lawyers, I really didn't understand what auditors did. And I had the old-fashioned view of the green eye shade and the very fine pencil points and lots of paper. And what I've learned the last 3 jobs, I've supervised accountants and auditors. And let me tell you one thing, they're much easier to manage than the lawyers, right? Because they actually have a body of rules that say, not just here's the conclusion you get to, but here's the rules you have to follow to get there. So that was a pleasure. And when we'd have disagreements, they would say, here's what the record says, as opposed to lawyers saying, look at me. And so the one thing that our law requires is the auditor. And so what we want is that you have an auditor who's competent, that you have an auditor who thinks of their job as helping the organization do better and focus on internal controls and focus on how the mission is being implemented and focus on the financial statements. The second thing is you need someone for the auditor to talk to. So 2 issues on this. One is an audit is in some ways a report card on management. All right. So what we were surprised to find is the research says that about 50% of audit committees never have an executive session. All right. So when the auditor comes and does their work, and then in theory, the auditor should have an executive session with the board to say, here are the issues that I found and whether management's responding. 50% of the organizations don't have that. So we want auditors who are knowledgeable and competent. We want the audit to be planned with the auditor. We want the auditor to have a chance to say, here's what I'm finding to the audit committee members without management present, after, of course, they've addressed issues with management. And when a management letter is prepared or recommendations are made by the auditor, we would like to see that there's a response. And what's depressing is how many organizations do get these letters, do have these conversations. The work papers show this was discussed, and then things don't happen. I was at a program yesterday talking about audit committees, and the federal government recommends that there be 2 hours of training for audit committee members, right, as part of compliance. Let me just say that's ridiculous. It's ridiculously low. It's one of the most challenging jobs in the organization, protecting the assets and the systems of a charity, and so we'd want to make sure that the auditor's message is listened to.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One is related, and I'm going to read both. Are charities of all shapes and sizes susceptible to embezzlement, and are some more vulnerable than others?
Okay, again, a great question on the embezzlement side. So are charities of all sizes susceptible to embezzlement? Well, you heard my earlier comment, everybody gets embezzled from, all right? And that's just the nature of human nature. If you trust someone, on occasion that trust is going to be ignored. So that no matter how big you are or small you are, we've seen embezzlements in sports leagues, embezzlements in volunteer fire companies, embezzlements in very, very large social service organizations, NILAG. So the idea that you're immune because of your size, religious organizations, again, you would think, well, I won't go there, but I was surprised, let me put it that way. Arts organizations. One of the problems you face in a lot of charities which do great work is you have all these people getting together to do good work and change the world. Somebody has to be the treasurer. Somebody has to be the CFO. And what you find, especially in volunteer organizations, is that nobody wants that job. So somebody finally raises their hand and says, I'll do this. And everyone says, thank God, because we don't have to do this. And then they do what they do, and the volunteer fire company. The response is, I trust this person to be with me in a burning building where I could die. How can I not trust him with money? Well, guess what? The fact that he's trustworthy in a burning building does not mean he's trustworthy with your cash. And so you need systems to make sure it will work.
Okay, time for just one more question. I'm sorry we can't get to them all. What is the responsibility of the board of directors? What happens when a board turns a blind eye?
Okay, so this is a very tough issue, the board of directors. And the reason it's a tough issue is most charities in New York are run on the board level by volunteers, all right? And I know a lot of those people are in this room today. So the issue is, what do you do when bad things happen? What we say is, again, bad things happen to good people. You'll be measured by your response, not by the fact that the bad thing happened in the first place. And I talked to people on boards, and one of the things that they say after embezzlement was, I didn't sign up for this. Well, if you think about marriage, it wasn't a contract where you signed up for 10 things, right? Once you're in, you've made a commitment, you have a fiduciary responsibility to carry forward. The same thing works with board members. So the idea is, think about what needs to be done in response. You saw the slides. If a board member steals, same thing as an employee stealing. But negligence and failure are going to happen on occasion, and the issue is, what do you do when the issue is raised, either by your auditor and saying you don't have the controls before you find out anything, or after it happens.
Okay, we're going to shift our program by about 10 minutes, but that's all the time for questions right now, and thank you.
Thank you, Luana.
Thank you, Chief Sheehan. That was excellent. Thank you very much.